So today the teaching that is going to happen, for this the main students are from the Russian Republic, those who are traditionally Buddhists and particularly following the Tibetan tradition of Buddhism, the Republic of Burayat and Kalmykia and Tuva. So people from these republics have followed the Tibetan Buddhism, and many people had in the past come to Tibet to study Buddhism, and also there had been many great scholars, top scholars of Tibetan Buddhism, and there are many works that are writings of these great scholars. So people, the Dharma brothers and sisters from the Russian Republic, Buddhist republics, and the white Russians also, who have come here for this teaching, people from St. Petersburg and Moscow, quite a number of you may have. You also are, I consider you also to be the main students or the audience for this teaching. Because although you live in Tibet, you don't have freedom. Not only that, but the Tibetan religion and culture, which to which you have, if you show your allegiance and devotion, then it's something considered to be wrong. What is demanded of you is to be more patriotic to the Chinese and not be passionate about your own culture and tradition. So before 1959, all over Tibet, in the 3 provinces of Tibet, everywhere there had been great masters, scholars and adepts. I mean, most of them are not with us, so have passed away. So there are very few people who can actually explain the Dharma properly and correctly. And even if they were able, they went around to, they wanted to give teachings, there are so much restriction in most of the places in Tibet. So you have come to India in order to learn what Buddhism actually is about. So you have got this opportunity today. When I was passing through, coming to the temple, I saw so many of you new arrivals from Tibet, and then here on the in front of the temple also there are many of you. So please listen to the teaching very carefully. So Buddhism is not only about doing prayers and just following it with blind faith, but you have to study them and then make transformation within your mind, and so that you become a good person, an ethical person. So with following good ethics, and you will be happy yourself, and the place where you live also would be filled with happiness, compassion, and love. So that's the main purpose. So you have to make transformation within yourself and become a better person, although you are at this point ignorant about the reality of things, but then the aim of Buddhism is to become a Buddha for the benefit of sentient beings. And so Buddhism is about actually studying and giving thought to the teaching, and not only to be followed with blind faith. And so the people from the Russian republics and also the Tibetan new arrivals, although I don't know much, whatever I know, I shall explain to you and listen to them carefully. And so at the same time, people who live in Dharamsala, the monks and nuns, as well as lay people, many of you are here. So you have heard me many times explain the Dharma. So some of you may feel it's rather something regular that's happening in Dharamsala. So if you think like that, I mean, you don't need to come here. Nobody actually, you are not obliged to come to the teaching. Listening to the teaching is not like listening to some kind of a historical account, because if it's an historical account or history that you want to listen to, then you don't need to listen to it over and over again. But here we are talking about Dharma, and so what you need to do is to listen to the Dharma and use it to check within yourself whether you have made some progress or not. If you, as you do reflect on the teaching, and then you'll get more certainty about the teaching, and it'll be, your understanding will also become more stable. And so that's important to keep in mind. And then there are people from other countries, many different countries. People do come usually for this kind of teaching. And then especially there are few Chinese. Dicholi. There. So there are a few Chinese also, and then there are also Japanese in the audience, and then Koreans and Vietnamese who also come regularly. So you are Buddhists, I mean, traditionally. So usually whenever I talk to Buddhists, I mean traditional Buddhists, I always say that we have to be 21st century Buddhists. What that means is you understand Buddhism, the whole structure of the essential points of Buddhism, and on top of that, through that, when you say, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, then you'll be a true Buddhist. Without understanding what the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha are, for which, of course, in order to understand them, you have to understand the Dharma well. And through that, you have to understand, come to the understanding that what the Dharma jewel or Sangha jewel is, which means the Arya Sanghas. And then through that, you have to come to understand what the Buddha, who the Buddha is, and then know the unique features, the qualities of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So through that, you'll be able to become a Buddhist who have understanding of Buddhism through reasoning. Without understanding what you are actually, what your faith actually is. Of course, there are many different religions, followers of many different religions, and then there are many the followers who are genuine followers of their own respective religions. And if you also think that you are more or less like them, you will not be able to really get the unique features of Buddhism, which distinguishes it from other religions. Of course, all religions deserve respect, because all religions help people So all of the different religions teach love, compassion, tolerance, talk contentment, and so forth. So which is very good. But Buddhism also teaches all these principles, self-discipline, and love, compassion, contentment, and so forth. But the reason why we talk about this is because everything is dependently arisen. Because we don't want suffering, but we want happiness. And so we have to understand what causes suffering and try to reduce those factors, and then try to cultivate the positive factors which bring about happiness from the small practices and progress further. So the pain and happiness are dependent on causes and conditions. So you have to understand the mind, which types of mind are unruly, undisciplined, and then try to know the factors which actually make our mind undisciplined, and then try to make changes in our mind and cultivate and build up the positive factors. So don't leave the teaching just to hearing. Just by listening to the teaching once, do not leave it just at that, but you have to actually use and reflect on the teaching in order to make some change and transformation within yourself. So that's, I wish to tell this to everyone. So usually when we have this kind of Dharma discourse, we recite the Heart Sutra. So we'll see Heart Sutra and not other languages. First, today we have people from the Buryat Republic of Russia to say the Heart Sutra in Buryat language. So thus I prostrate to the Arya Triple Gem. Thus did I hear at one time that Bhagwan was dwelling on Vaz of Vulture Mountain in Rajgriha, together with great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagwan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra: any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the perfection of wisdom, the profound perfection of wisdom, should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no audio, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomena. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origin, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, because bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom and mind, the mind without obscuration and without fear, having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awaken to an impossible, perfect, complete enlightenment in in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the mantra the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequal to the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared that yatha om gate para samgate bodhi soha shariputra. The bodhisattva mahasattva should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Aryavalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadoti Putra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Aryavalokiteshvara, those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods and humans, Asuras, Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan.
Türkü şaba, molba, bölgü dülük uğuyba, Allah'ı uğuyba, Allah'ı uğuşuyor uğuybalana, Şerboda tene, vacı satınağay, Allah'ı uğuyun tola, delik vermeyete şutıcı, Sıçkıldı türkü uğuyba, taşakı uğuy, Boluha maşada nükşücü, Yıkı nirvane esittin kırıba, Olun sakta hoğun tugusun, vacı fotoğrayı eleti, Tugusun olkan balaba, Tevele onun gücün büdükte, Bilik vermede tanya, Ohane tanya, Dınsul uguyu tanya, Saso gışıte saso tanya, Hamık zılın bodeya, Maşada amandoşa tanya, Hodol gışıyı onun gücü müdücü, Bilik vermede tanya kılıba, Sajiyata om gade, ba sam gade, vaji soha, Shariputam, Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Telmata, Rumnaim, Bilikvainita, Holsakti, Dindehe, Elaja, Tugus, Nukshaham, Volham, Teyanda, Badaja, Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Alkichvada, Iguja, Zangya, Bolgova, Hang, izvoltene, kubutele, telenşinge, koluna, telenşinge, böyle, yamarşini kılın, telemete, gumnayın, böyle, balmite, yabagdaha, balına, telenşinge, yerhın, bolkat, tugudur, dağın, bayısava, ilajı, tugus, nükşahın, bolkan, çiğgıcı, kanjak, balahında, amin gabiyatı, şerif oturda, va, Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Aryavalokiteshvara, Gupy, Tugus, Nukurlodba, Tengeli, Gumba, Asoli, Kanderte, Nigır, Yurtumsada, Vaysaja, Ilajı, Tugus, Nukşahım, Bolkaneza, Nigeyi, Elektron, Maktava, Ilajı, Tugus, Nukşahım, Ekil, Delik, Balmiyede, Bol Zürküm, Nevte, Kanyem, Tugusada, Sarvan, Mangalam, Volkanın bakşın volgoyla, Hadıda tümüzün voltagay.
So I'll say in Tibetan the mantra of our Heart Sutra. And this verse of salutation from Abhisamaya Alamkara, which is a commentary on the implicit meaning or content of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. And also the salutation verse from Mula Madhyamaka Karita. So salutation to the mother of all the Buddhas 33 times, perfection of wisdom. That's the mantra of the Heart Sutra. The salutation verse from Abhisamaya Lankara: I prostrate to the mother of Buddhas, of the hearers and bodhisattvas, who through the knowledge of all leads hearers, seeking pacification of complete peace, who through knowledge of paths causes those helping migrators to achieve the aim of the world, and through the possession of which the subduers set forth the varieties of all aspects. Salutation verse from Nagarjuna's Mula Madhima Karika: I prostrate the perfect Buddha, the best of teachers, who taught that whatever is dependent, arisen, unceasing, unborn, not annihilated, impermanent, not coming, not going, without distinction, without identity, and free from conceptual construction. So when you do this kind of Dharma discourse, give this discourse, we first recite the verse of taking refuge and bodhicitta, in order to bear the correct motivation to listen to the teaching. What that means is, whatever we do, if we do it with some positive attitude, then that work will also be positive. Whereas if you do something with bad motivation, then that becomes, whatever you do becomes non-virtuous and faulty. And then, of course, there are neutral things that you do with neutral attitude. So here we are dealing with Dharma. I'm explaining the teaching, and especially, particularly the teaching here is Mahayana teaching. So in order to, for this teaching of Mahayana to become a Mahayana teaching for you, you have to cultivate or bring up in your mind this correct motivation of bodhicitta, this altruistic intention to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. So you have to be clear in your mind about, bring up in your mind clearly the thought of bodhicitta. So for the benefit of all sentient beings, you think to become a Buddha. That's the motivation. So you have to know what Buddhahood is. Does Buddhahood come instantly, or does it come through gradual progression through the path, and then beginning with an ordinary person and progressing along the path and becoming a fully enlightened one? So of course it comes through gradual progression. So what makes you go through this change and progress is the Dharma, the jewel of Dharma. And once you attain the true Dharma within yourself, the true path and cessation within yourself, then you become a Sangha. So for that you have to know what the three objects of refuge are, that Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, in order to take refuge in them. So without knowing what the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha mean, merely reciting the lines where you say, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma and the Supreme Assembly until I'm enlightened. These two lines show that of the principle of taking refuge. And then the next two lines say, until with the practices, through the practices of generosity and so forth, may I become enlightened Buddha for the benefit, for the sake of all sentient beings. Shows that you are not only intending to become enlightened for the benefit of yourself alone, but actually to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. And therefore, even within the context of taking refuge, you take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha in order that you may be able to benefit all sentient beings. And so in that way, your taking refuge also becomes the Mahayana way of taking refuge. And so, having taken refuge in in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, whatever I do to benefit all sentient beings, may all these become causes for me to become a Buddha, to benefit all sentient beings. So whatever practices I have done, such as generosity and so forth, may they become a cause for me to become a Buddha for the sake of sentient beings. So that's what you will say. So when you say, I take refuge until I'm enlightened, you are saying you come across the term I, and also whatever practices such as generosity and so forth I have done. When you say that, you come across the same term. So you have to first check where this I is, what this I is, whether the I refers to a part of the body, or your mind, a part of your mind. So if you try to find the self or the person within the body and the mind, of course you will not be able to find it in any of them. But that doesn't mean that the self is not existent, but a person is there. So you have to reflect on this I and come to understand that it cannot be found under analysis when you try to search for it. So although it's not findable, still if you can reflect and think that this is I is not totally non-existent, but this I is there, merely imputed. So the practices of generosity and so forth I have done, which are the causes for accumulating merit, and then the understanding of emptiness or selflessness, which is that of the wisdom part of the practice. So when you say the practices such as the accumulation of merit and wisdom, to say this would be much better, rather than saying merely saying the merits that I gain through practices of generosity and so forth. If you could say whatever practices I have done, such as generosity and so forth, may they become causes for me to become a Buddha for the benefit of sentient beings.
Russian.
This verse is not given in the text that the Russians have published, but it goes, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha until I'm enlightened. Whatever practices, whatever store of merit and wisdom I accumulate through the practice of generosity and so forth, may they become cause for me to become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. So we are saying this 3 times. I prostrate to the Gautama, the Buddha who has taught the Holy Dharma, in order to rid us of all wrong views out of his compassion. So first, for the Russians, for the last few decades, for many decades you have not even heard the Dharma, and also the Tibetan newcomers from Tibet had been through the same kind of situation. You have to be rather keep low profile when you do some Dharma practice. So what is Dharma? So the term in Tibetan is Chu, which has the meaning of making change and transformation. So it's a means to correct ourselves. So which means it has the meaning of making change in our mind. The Sanskrit term is Dharma, and also in Pali they say Dhamma, which has the meaning of holding some identity. So which means having its own characteristic, defining characteristics or definition. But when we make distinction between Dharma or spirituality and mundane activities, then here the Dharma has the meaning of liberating us from the suffering of fearful existences. So some principle or means by which you are protected from the fear of suffering. So generally speaking, religion, there are so many different religions in the world. In India, for over 3,000 to 4,000 years, religion spread in human community. So perhaps around 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, people may not have much thought of thinking about, people were not thinking much about long-term future, but only to meet with their own needs, like animals. But then, as time went on, people kept their hope in some kind of a higher power when they've met with some fearful situations and so forth. And therefore, they started the practice of keeping faith in religion. And then in India, around 3,000, more than 3,000 years ago, the first religious tradition that spread in India may be Sankhya school. And then in Egypt also there was this ancient religion which also seemed to be believing in past and future lives. But in India, about 3,000 years ago, religion spread in India, and then around 2,600 years from now, Buddha came, and also Buddha Shakyamuni came in India, and Buddhism spread. And then Mahavir also came at that time, and Jainism spread. And then later on, they spread the Vedantic tradition and so forth also in India. So there are many different religions in the world. So and also Judaism, Christianity, and Islam spread in the world. So we see there are so many different religious traditions. So first we'll have tea. So His Holiness asked how many Russians are there at this time. The 3,000 of them. 1,300 of them are here.
Are there 1,500?
Hmm?
Are there 1,500?
1,300.
다 대단. 안에다 노동자 지금 시대나는 지금 대바체 런업되지 되기다 주로 매일 다네. 다 야도 차잖아. 그렇게서 야 차잖아. 하나 지금 전부 뒤가
So, for the last 3,000, 4,000 years, religions have spread in the world. And as far as India is concerned, it has its own homegrown religion, as well as religions that have immigrated to India as well. So all the different religious traditions that are in the world seem to be present in India, such as Hinduism, Jainism, and then Sikhism, Buddhism, and so forth. And then there is the Zoroastrianism which spread from in Iran. And also Christianity, Judaism, and Islam have become established in India. And so India has all the different major world religions. So all these religions are really helpful to so many people. There have been so great personalities in the world who have sacrificed themselves for the benefit of others in the world. And so all people from all these religions, great beings from all these religions have been there. So the practices of tolerance, patience, and so forth, also without being able to tolerate others, but also becoming attached to one's own religion. I mean, there are those who do this, but they are unable to really practice sincerely what their religions teach. And then they distinguish, make this distinction between my religion and their religion, and so forth. And so, in the name of religion, they try to. There are people who try to cause conflict and quarrel and so forth. But generally speaking, the messages that are given in the different religions, if the followers really practice them sincerely, of course all the religions teach the same practices. But the difference lies in the philosophical understanding of the different religions. So with regard to that, around 10 or 15 years ago, there was a religious gathering of interfaith religious gathering where one Sufi scholar, in his talk, raised three questions. Which the first one is, what is a self? We all have this innate sense of an I. So what that I or self is, so searching for that is one. And then the second question is whether this I or self has a beginning, and the third question is whether there is an end to it or not. So he said that all religions try to answer these three questions. So the different philosophical views of the religious traditions could be explained in terms of these three questions. Regarding the first question, except Buddhism, all other religious traditions in the world believe in a self, which is like a master of one's body and mind. So this self or I is seen or as being unchanging, singular, and autonomous from the psychophysical aggregates. So this is what in Buddhist scriptures are termed as self, which is permanent, single, and autonomous. Is there a Mongolian translation? His Holiness is talking to one Mongolian monk who doesn't seem to have any radio or anything. So he has been in a monastery in South India for 1.5 years, studying the logic primer, this subject which is called the collective topics. So we're talking about the self, which is posited or asserted by the different religious traditions, except Buddhism. So of course they have some reason to assert that. If you think, when you think about an I, when you think about yourself, do you have this sense of this I being not the body, not neither the body nor the mind? So do you get the idea that there is a self there, which is like the chief or the governor of the body and the mind? And but on the other hand, if you think about a body, do you get the sense or the notion that this body you have now was there when you were born? Of course, you don't think that this body you have now was there when you were a baby. So there's someone there who is pointing to and asking you. And of course, you will not think that you had a gray hair when you were born. So you don't think that you had gray hair when you were born. And also you don't think that you have wrinkles on your face when you were born. So you know that body has changed. So we can see the change that has happened in our body. We say when I was young, I was really healthy, but now I'm old and I have all these pains and aches in the joints and so forth. So you never think that this body that you have as an old person now was there when you were young. And then a professor, when he thinks, or he or she thinks that he or she is a professor, of course he will not think that the knowledge that he or she has now had been there when he or she was born. But then you can say, when I was born, Of course, and when you think about the I itself, and of course you don't make the distinction between the I now and then the I that you was there when you were born and so forth. So this I seems to be you seem to have this notion that this I has been there all the time. And so those who assert the I or the self is not dependent on the body and mind think that if the I has to change all the time, if it depends on the body and the mind, then you would have to have different instances of an I as the body ages. But that's not possible, they say. No religious traditions actually say that after death, you become nothing. No religion says that. For example, those who believe in the soul, of course, they say after the death of a person, there comes the final judgment day, and at which God makes the decision. Those who have followed the God's words go up into the heavens, and those who have not followed it correctly, then they go to hell on that final judgment. In Shintoism, they believe that the spirit remains, and it will be reborn in heaven. So most of the religions believe that there is something even after death, and which could only be explained on the basis of the soul theory. And so those who believe in such a soul and say that this soul is not dependent on the body and the mind. But Buddhism says there is no such a soul. Buddha says this notion of an I is a devilish mind, and it causes all kinds of views. And the psychophysical aggregates are empty, and therefore there is no self. So why he's saying this notion of I that we have is a devilish mind is because it holds on to a self which is independent, autonomous, self-sufficiently existing. And so based on such a view of a self-sufficient, autonomous self, then you grow attachment to oneself. And because of that, when some kind of an obstacle comes, you face some obstacle to that to something that you like, that you are attached to, then you become angry, and then accordingly you also become the hatred and so forth, jealousy and so forth also grow because of this strong clinging to the I, attachment to the I. So if you look at people who are rather calm, have very good nature, you can play with them, you can joke with them, and they don't become angry and annoyed. But people who are not so open, even if you crack jokes at them, you'll not be able to make them happy, but they become angry very easily. And so because of the attachment to oneself, you also become really angry at others easily. So people don't actually try to harm others, not without any reasons. They do it because something is wrong, because they think that the other person is actually harming them, their parents, their relatives, their possessions, and so forth. And so because of this attachment to oneself, one's relatives, one's possessions, and so forth, you think mine, this, mine that. And that in turn comes from this strong attachment to the I, to yourself. So this notion of an I, independent or autonomous I, is what Buddha terms as a devilish mind. So because it is the source of all kinds of shortcomings and faults. So this, therefore, it is like a mind, the devil, and it is the source of all kinds of views, which exaggerate things, and then also views of denigration of certain others. And so all these different views come from such a view, notion of an I. And then what is it? The psychophysical aggregates are empty. The five aggregates which can be brought down into the body and the mind. So if you try to search for the I within the body and the mind, you will not be able to find. Of course, if the I did exist as it appears to have some kind of independent existence, we should be able to find it when we search for it. But then that's not the case. What happens to us is that we have this notion of an I, which is independent from the body and the mind, which is like a governor of the body and the mind. But if it were like that, then we should be able to find it when we analyze the self within the mind and the body. So, because we cannot find it through when we search for it, just as it appears to us to have some independent existence, but then it does not exist the way it appears to us. So of course we can say that in this hall there is no elephant. Why? Because if it existed in this hall, we should be able to see it. It should be perceptible to us. And therefore, because it's not perceptible, whereas something which should be perceptible if it were here is not here, we can say it's not here. Of course, when it comes to really tiny, microscopic sort of living being, it may be different, but which may not be perceptible to our senses. So something which is actually accessible to our senses, if it's not here, then we can say that's not existent, it's not here. And therefore, if you search for the I, if it did exist as it appears to have independent existence, we should be able to find it when we search for it. Because it's not there, we cannot find it. But does it mean that then the self or the I is not there at all? Of course not. There is a person, there is an I. But how does this I exist? And then Buddha goes on to continues in the same text that just as a chariot is imputed on the basis of the different parts of it, such as the wheels and the planks and so forth, same logic could be applied to aeroplanes. So many different parts come together, are put together, assembled together, and then we have an aeroplane. And then that object becomes is able to fly in the sky. And so it's made up of so many different parts. So when we think about an elephant, an aeroplane, we have this solid thing that in our mind, it's if it has some kind of a solid existence, but that's not the case. It's made up of different parts. And so just like a chariot, which is imputed on the basis of its different parts, likewise a self or a person is imputed on the basis of our body, and then the aggregates of feeling or sensation, perception, compositional factors, and consciousness. And so on the basis of these 5 aggregates, we impute a person, just as a chariot is imputed on the basis of its different parts. So, apart from this, the self being merely imputed on the basis of the 5 aggregates, there is no self. When a person dies, of course, this body becomes extinct, but then the sensations, feelings, perception, and the other mental factors and consciousness, of course, cease. So a person is imputed on his or her psychophysical aggregates, but when he dies, does all these psychophysical aggregates also cease to exist anymore? Of course, within the body itself, we can make distinction between the gross, subtle, and the subtlemost. And similarly, it can be done with the mind. So this human body, and we have also the human brain, on the basis of which we have sensations and perceptions and also so forth, which are rather on a gross level. Of course, we also dream. When we are asleep, we have dreams. But of course, in dream, our senses don't work. But we see things in dreams, such as form, sounds, and so forth. Although the form, sound, and so forth, when we are awake, are not there when we are asleep, but then sometimes it happens to people that they can have a dream body, which separates from this gross body. Some yogis actually can separate themselves from this gross body. And sometimes to some people it happens that when they are asleep, their minds kind of travels to other places. So there seems to be, this indicates that there is a subtler body than this gross body that we have, which can travel to other places. Generally speaking, even the different things that appear to us in our dream can also give us different feelings and sensations and experiences. But when it comes to the very subtle level for example, in India, after somebody has died, for 1, 2, or 3 weeks, the body, there have been cases where the body had not decomposed. There have been around 20 cases like this. Of course, the person has already stopped breathing, and then there's no, the heart is also not working, and then because of that, there's no circulation of blood, and then brain also becomes dead. Then they reach a point of brain death. But then this body still remains very fresh. Without decomposing. Recently in New Zealand, a Tibetan monk, Thupten Rinpoche, he was called, and after his death, his body remained very fresh. And so as it was done in the West, of course in hospital it happened, and so that when he stopped breathing, the doctors came to check the body, and they said the body really has not decomposed. And so for about two weeks, his body was kept in the hospital like that. And then my own senior tutor, Ling Rinpoche, also remained for about 13 days or so. His body remained very fresh even after his clinical death. And then there have been other people who also, whose body remained very fresh even after death. So we need an explanation here. I mean, we cannot, science cannot explain this. So once the person reaches a brain dead state, the person is no more there. And so this is something that is, the fact that the body remains fresh is something that people can actually witness. So what they need some explanation for this. So why does this happen? And of course, in Buddhism, we don't say, oh, this is because of some deities or some ghost or anything like that. But then we explained it on the basis by saying that the subtle mind is still in the body. And the subtle body also is still there in this gross body. So long as these two are there remain in the body, this gross body also doesn't decompose. But as soon as the subtle mind and body leaves the body, then this body, the old called the gross body, also starts decomposing and giving out foul smell and so forth. And so some scientists are now doing some research on this phenomenon. So they had been able to actually do some experiment on one or two bodies where, of course, the person has already gone through brain death. So there had been some indication that there was something for the scientists. So we are not able to tell who is going to die when. And so scientists one time left a machine with us in Delhi Hospital. And we had the machine, but we didn't have anybody staying in Tukdam in this meditative sort of state even after clinical death. But when there were cases where people were able to stay in Tukdam, then we didn't have the machine at that time. So, of course, when we have the machine, we can't go to people and say, please die, of course. And when...
Russian translation,
No.
Okay. English
No.
Yeah.
And then later on we had the machine rather here, and then people were trained to use these machines. And then also as people were able to do some experiment on someone who has just passed away, we also are able to give reports to the scientists in America. So in Buddhism, we talk about gross, subtle, and very subtlemost body and mind. So when we die from this life, what goes from this life to the next is not the gross mind and body, but then the subtle mind and body, which takes rebirth. And also in Buddhism, there is an explanation of the in-between state, between this, which is called Bardo, this existence between this life and the next rebirth. There is also explanation of four existences. So what goes from one life to the next is the subtle mind and body. So there is no autonomous self, which is like a governor of the body and the mind, separate from the body and the mind. And this is what Buddhism says, whereas other religious traditions assert a soul theory. So this is what Buddhism rejects, and Buddhism is not rejecting a conventional I or a person as such. So this answers the first question. And then second question, whether the self has a beginning or not. In other religious traditions, they talk about Creator God, who is not actually created by any other factors, but is always independent. In Buddhist texts on logic and epistemology, they talk about these creators as being which means an eternal being who is unchanging, but self-evolved. And then all the rest of the things are its creation. So Christianity, and the Christians say that this life is created by God, and God is called the Father. So He created us, they believe. So because of that, it could be actually called a Father as being the creator. So when they think that they are created by God, then they feel closer to the God. And they can have their relation, they can feel sort of a fatherly relationship with their creator. And that in turn helps to reduce this ego. So this really helps the followers to have single-pointed faith in their Creator, God. So from their point of view, of course, the self has a beginning, because when it was created in this life, it began. Whereas those who do not believe in a Creator God, such as Buddhism and Jainism, so these are the two major religions which don't believe in a Creator God. And therefore, they also say there is a past life. And within the theistic religions, of course, there are those who do not believe in past life, and then there are those who do believe in past life. So Hinduism, for example, say that everything was created by Brahma, but then once created, the beings actually take rebirth, are reborn again and again, and they also explain this on the. They also have the theory of karma. So for Christianity and other religions, this life began in this very life when it was created. So on the basis of the causality, and of course we can say that there is no beginning to the self. In Buddhism, whether there is a beginning to the self or not has to be checked by actually checking into the body and the mind, whether they have a beginning or not. Of course, this gross body that we have has a beginning in this life, but then when you go into the subtler levels of the body and the mind, of course, we cannot point to a beginning. And similarly, it is the case with the mind. We have a mind. We have this experience that this mind changes all the time. And as children, of course, we were not so educated. But then, as time went on, we studied, and then we become more and more educated. And then we also have all kinds of emotional experiences. So this shows there is change in the mind. So once there is change, this shows that it's dependent on causes and conditions. The hills, mountains, and so forth, we see also that they also change over the hundreds and thousands of years. So when the world first came to be, of course it came from a very subtle particles, and then they got together and formed bigger objects and so forth, and then we have the world. So when the Big Bang happens, at that moment, of course, all these things that we see now around us, the hills, mountains, and so forth, were not there, of course. But they came into being slowly over the years. So this shows that they are dependent on causes and conditions. So within the causes and conditions, the external things have their own the primary causes and conditions, which is called a substantial cause. And so substantial cause actually are those factors which actually turn into the effect. Whereas then there are other causes which are the cooperative conditions, which do not actually become the object that they give rise to, but they help in giving rise to them. And so there are these two things. One is the substantial cause, and the other is cooperative condition. So just as there are these two things in the external world, similarly in the internal world of our mind, have these undergo change through the substantial cause and these cooperative conditions. So this mind or consciousness, of course, it is on the one hand dependent on the brain as well, the mind that we have, but then it's not necessarily the case that the mind, the thoughts come up because of some the chemical change in the brain. But in fact, these days, the scientists are able to see that our thoughts can actually affect the change in our brain. So this the change in the mind itself, of course, cannot be explained only on the basis of chemical reactions of the brain alone. So what the scientists are able to see these days in their experiments is indicates that the changes in the brain can be brought about by the change in our thought. And people can also see that when people become very unhappy because of their something wrong in their thought process. So the scientists are telling, the medical scientists and the doctors are telling the people who have restless minds to take rest. They don't mean just to lie down on the bed, but if people are full of fear, anxiety, jealousy, arrogance, and so forth, of course, even if they physically may be relaxing, lying on a bed, they will not be relaxing at all. They are restless. So when you are restful in mind, then you are actually resting and relaxing. So the main thing is getting a rest to the mind. If you are happy and composed and calm, and then even if something, you will not feel tired even if you may be busy. You may have also this same experience. of meeting a friend, I mean, then you'll share your thoughts with the, and when you are really enjoying the conversation with a friend, then the time goes very quickly. But if your conversation is not so nice, then even if it may have been really short time, you'll feel that it's been really long. So isn't that your experience? I also have the same experience. When I meet people who are really appealing, then of course I don't feel tired talking with them. I feel really relaxed. Whereas if I have to talk with somebody who really annoys me, then it's like with whom I can't have really good conversation. Then I wish if this conversation could actually end. So in the first case, the conversation with your friend was rather appealing and enjoyable, whereas the other was not. So you feel tired, and so feeling relaxed or restful has to do mainly with the mind. So the mind is really powerful. You can see, if you are really calm, and even if you may be physically going through some kind of a strenuous experience, for example, the athletes who have to compete in the Olympic Games in sports, of course they go through strenuous practices which really give them lots of physical pain, but they don't mind because their aim is to compete in the Olympics, and therefore they want to be really well trained. And so they feel really satisfied, even if they have strenuous exercises physically. And so if you compare between the mental happiness and physical kind of comfort and joy, I mean, the mental ones are more powerful. So even if you may be really happy and in your mind, but then you're going through some problem physically, I mean, this state of mind can actually suppress or override the physical pain. And then we also have this ability to make distinction between good and bad. You see something, your eye sense or consciousness sees something, but it doesn't make any distinction between what you saw in the past, or whether you saw that thing in the past or not, whether it's good or bad. But then that is done, that distinction is actually made by our mind, which follows that sensory perception. Of course, you will see, you can see, look at something, and then you close your eye and have that image of the thing in your mind. So this shows that there is a sensory perception and then a mental one. So there are senses which are the consciousness which are dependent on our sensory faculties. The 5 of them are there, and then there is also the mental perception which follows these senses. And then there are other states of mind which have nothing to do with the sensory perceptions as such. For example, if you talk about faith, when you have faith and compassion, of course they have to do with your mind. So this mind continues, whereas the sense perceptions, sense perceptions come into existence and then they cease to exist off and on. So sensory perceptions are also dependent on a condition which is called the immediately preceding condition, which is the mind itself. So you cannot posit a beginning to the mind, because if you were to do so, then something which is not a mind has to be a substantial cause of the mind. Or you would have to say that the mind arises rather without any causes. But then we can say that's not true at all. So then what that shows is that the mind has to depend on some causes and conditions. And that cause also has to be of similar type. So when we talk about mind, if there is no substantial cause, which is a mind with the characteristic features of cognition and clarity, you cannot have a mind. And so we can posit a person, talk about a person on the basis of being imputed on the basis of our mind and body, and mainly the mind, and within that the sixth consciousness, the mental consciousness. And because this mental consciousness is without beginning, therefore the self or person is without beginning. So this is what Buddhism explains. And then the third question, whether there is an end to the person or self or not. To this, those of theistic religions say that in the end, when somebody is born in heaven, once they reach heaven, I don't know, I don't think there is so much analysis of the self as we find in these theistic traditions, the way we find them in the Buddhist tradition. So I asked one Christian, or what happens once somebody reaches heaven? There's not much, nothing much really found in the scriptures about this. So Buddhism, from the Buddhist point of view, even if somebody were following, somebody is following the theistic religion, but then if the person is really sincerely following the religion that he or she professes to follow, then perhaps it's good when they reach heaven, it would be really good. Even if he were to live, he or she were to stay in the heaven forever. But then if you were to, on the other hand, of course, due to certain, not following their God's will, they say that once you die, you will also go to hell. And so that's like eternally. If you were to live in hell, that's not so nice. So within our mind, there are lots of states of consciousness which are related to our ignorance, or connected to the ignorance that we have, and because of which we also create karma, and because of which we experience suffering, misery. And so Buddhism says suffering is rooted in ignorance. So in the 12 links of dependent origination, the first link is that of ignorance. So because of ignorance, we create karma, which in turn leads us to suffering. So as long as there is ignorance, there is also some state of mind which also directly goes against it, which sees the reality of things. Ignorance is ignorant about the reality of things. And there is also the knowledge which we can build, which sees the reality of things. And therefore, through that knowledge, we can actually, which actually is based on logic and reason, and is supported by valid reasoning and valid experiences and cognition. Therefore, we can actually use this kind of knowledge to overcome the ignorance, because ignorance has no basis at all in valid reasoning. But the mere mind, which has the characteristics of clarity and luminosity, or luminosity and cognition, is neither good nor bad. But due to certain conditions, we have wrong thoughts. And whereas due to certain other conditions, in turn, we can have positive states of mind as well. And therefore, the mind, the basic mind itself, is not tainted in its true nature. And therefore, Buddhism says there is possibility of overcoming all kinds of defilements that are in our mind. And therefore, the defilements are rather temporary. And so, this continuity of the mind will go on until you become a Buddha. So therefore, in Buddhism, the self has neither beginning nor an end. But within Buddhist philosophical tradition, some say that after becoming an arhat, and someone passes away, for example, according to them, the Buddha himself, after his death, anything that has to do with the Buddha has ceased. His mind and the body have ceased. And so they say there is an end. According to them, there is an end to the self. But then, generally speaking, Buddhism philosophically we can explain that there is no beginning and end to the mind. So this is how we can explain philosophically the differences between the different traditions. So we'll stop here.